In 1965, a single sandwich brought aboard a spacecraft triggered a formal investigation by the United States Congress. The problem was not the filling, it was the bread. And that is only one of 12 breads with a story you would not expect. 12 breads, one complete breakdown.
The baguette. It cannot be changed without losing its official status. According to a 1993 French decree, a traditional baguette must contain only 4 ingredients: wheat flour, water, salt, and yeast. The use of preservatives, fats, or sugar reclassifies it as ordinary pastry, removing its right to this designation. The geometry of the baguette is a way to control heat transfer. Its long, narrow shape increases the surface area relative to its volume, allowing the oven's heat to quickly trigger the Maillard reaction. Sugars and amino acids on the surface react to form a dense, crunchy crust faster than the interior crumb can develop. The result is a specific structure, a pronounced, rigid shell with a relatively light interior. This is not just about taste, it is control over physical processes. Architecture where form directly shapes the result.
Sourdough. It cannot be precisely reproduced even in controlled laboratory conditions. Unlike industrial baking, its structure comes from the life cycles of a complex ecosystem of wild yeast and lactic acid bacteria, such as Lactobacillus sanfrancisensis. Inside this environment, microorganisms constantly interact. They produce organic acids and antimicrobial compounds, suppressing foreign flora while adapting to temperature, humidity, and the chemical composition of the local water. Over time, this ecosystem develops a unique microbiological profile that becomes a fingerprint of a specific place. Sourdough cultures kept active for decades or even centuries become the living biological heritage of a family or bakery. They cannot simply be copied. When moved to a new environment, their composition gradually changes. You do not create this bread from scratch, you continue a process that began long before you.
The pita. Its structure comes from a brief but intense physical process inside the dough. When a flat piece of dough enters an oven heated above 230 degrees Celsius, which is about 450 degrees Fahrenheit, the water inside it rapidly turns into steam. Steam pressure builds in fractions of a second, pushing against the gluten and forcing the layers apart from within. This famous steam pocket is not decorative, and it is not an accident. It turns the bread into a natural, fully biodegradable container for food. The cavity allows fillings to be placed directly inside, making it practical and easy to eat on the go in the hot climates of the Middle East. The form does not come only from the baker's skill, but from the behavior of superheated steam in a confined space. This is physics shaping the form of bread.
Naan. Its preparation relies on extreme heat and vertical surfaces. Traditionally, it is baked on the clay walls inside a tandoor, heated to nearly 500 degrees Celsius, which is about 900 degrees Fahrenheit. In these conditions, the dough bakes rapidly, yet the naan stays in place because it sticks to the surface and moisture evaporates instantly on contact with the hot clay. The bread is not laid flat, it holds on to the oven wall until it is fully cooked. The characteristic charred spots and air bubbles are not mistakes. They are the visible result of direct heat and intense sugar reactions in the flour. If the dough's hydration is off or the timing is wrong, it can lose its grip and fall into the heat below. This is baking at the limits of temperature, bread that holds on to a surface where it normally should not.
Ciabatta. It looks like a product of old tradition, but in reality it is younger than most modern tech brands. This bread was officially introduced in 1982 by Italian miller Arnaldo Capillary. It was not the result of centuries of history, but a direct response to the dominance of the French baguette in the sandwich market. Its key distinction is extremely high hydration, about 80% water relative to the flour. Such a ratio makes the dough difficult to handle, requiring long, careful mixing to develop the gluten. During baking, the excess moisture creates large, irregular air pockets, the so-called open crumb. These pockets act like reservoirs, holding oil, sauces, and juices without breaking the structure. The texture of ciabatta is not accidental. It was designed for a specific purpose. It is an artificially created tradition born out of market competition.
Rye bread. It did not enter the human diet by choice, but out of necessity. Rye can grow where wheat struggles, on poor acidic soils and in the colder climates of northern Europe. However, its composition creates challenges. Because it contains little gluten, rye dough lacks elasticity. It is dense, heavy, and difficult to work with. Instead of gluten forming the structure, this role is taken over by pentosans, complex carbohydrates that bind water. They create a thick, moisture-retaining network that keeps the bread fresh much longer than wheat bread. This made rye a critical resource in northern regions where conditions were harsh and food stability mattered. While wheat was linked to milder climates and variety, rye became a survival technology captured in a dense, dark loaf.
Pumpernickel. This is not baking in the usual sense. Instead of short exposure to high heat, the dough is processed slowly over time, sometimes for up to 24 hours, nearly a full day. It is placed in closed molds inside a moist steam environment at a temperature not exceeding 110 degrees Celsius, which is about 230 degrees Fahrenheit. In these conditions, moisture does not escape, and the hard crust typical of most bread does not form. Instead of rapid baking, slow Maillard reactions take place inside the dough, gradually changing the sugars in the rye. The crumb becomes dense and dark, with a naturally sweet and slightly earthy flavor without the use of any coloring. Pumpernickel is the result of long chemical transformation under controlled time and temperature. Here, flavor is shaped not just by ingredients, but by duration.
Focaccia, a close relative of the ancient bread Panis Focaccius, a name that literally means baked in the hearth. This is not just a simple bread, it is a surface designed to hold oil. The indentations pressed into the dough by the baker's fingers are not decorative. They trap olive oil and sea salt, keeping them from running off during baking. In the oven, a clear contrast in texture forms. The top remains soft and airy, while the bottom, in contact with oil on the baking surface, becomes hotter and develops a crisp, rich base. Focaccia is often served alongside a meal, not just as bread, but as something that absorbs oils, sauces, and flavors from everything around it. The tortilla. Corn, as a staple grain, has a critical limitation. Vitamin B3, or niacin, is present in a bound form that the human body cannot easily absorb. The solution was discovered in Mesoamerica thousands of years before modern nutrition science through a process known as nixtamalization. The grain is soaked and cooked in an alkaline solution of lime or wood ash, which changes its chemical structure. This process breaks down parts of the corn's cell walls, making the niacin bioavailable. Without this step, societies that relied heavily on corn often developed pellagra, a deficiency disease affecting the skin, nervous system, and overall health. A tortilla is not just an unleavened flatbread. It is the result of ancient applied biochemistry that allowed a nutritionally limited grain to become the foundation of entire diets. It is not just bread, but a technology of chemical adaptation.
Brioche. This bread changes the usual physics of dough. While most bread relies on a strong gluten structure, brioche uses a large amount of butter and eggs. At a molecular level, fat coats the gluten strands, weakening their ability to bond and form a rigid network. As a result, instead of an elastic crumb, the structure becomes soft, fine, and slightly fibrous, somewhere between bread and pastry. In the 17th and 18th centuries, brioche was a symbol of status. The cost of ingredients and the difficulty of working fat into the dough made it inaccessible to most people. Here, fat changes both the behavior of the dough and its final texture. This is a shift from bread as simple nourishment to bread as a more complex creation, a design where fat defines the structure. Injera. It changes the traditional role of bread, turning it from a side dish into the foundation of the entire meal. Its base is teff, an ancient grain from the Ethiopian highlands with extremely small seeds. Because it contains no gluten and is rich in iron, teff requires special processing. The batter ferments for several days as wild yeast and bacteria develop a sour flavor and create a porous, sponge-like structure. The surface of injera is covered with tiny holes that serve a purpose. They act like a capillary system, absorbing sauces and liquids from the dishes placed on top. In East African culture, injera serves as a tablecloth, a plate, and a utensil all at once. Food is placed directly on it, and people tear off pieces to scoop up what they eat. Here, bread is not served alongside the meal, it becomes part of the eating system itself, a form directly shaped by the way it is used.
The bagel, its process includes an unusual step. Before baking, the dough rings are placed in boiling water for 30 to 90 seconds, or roughly half a minute to a minute and a half. This step causes the starches on the surface to gelatinize, forming a dense outer layer that limits how much the dough can expand in the oven. That is what gives the bagel its signature dense and chewy texture. During baking, the outer layer caramelizes, creating a glossy, slightly crisp crust. The hole in the center is not just decorative, it increases surface area and allows for more even exposure to heat and water, helping the dough cook more consistently. The shape of the bagel is an adaptation to its cooking process, geometry, where form defines texture. Unique fact: in March 1965, during the Gemini 3 mission, astronaut John Young committed one of the most famous protocol violations in early NASA history. He secretly brought a corned beef sandwich on rye bread bought from a deli in Florida aboard the spacecraft. As soon as the sandwich was opened in microgravity, the problem became obvious. The bread began to break apart into fine crumbs that did not fall but spread into a floating cloud of particles. These fragments were a real hazard. They could be pulled into the ventilation system, interfere with onboard electronics, or get into the eyes and airways of the crew. The incident triggered a serious response and was discussed at the level of the United States Congress. From that point on, crumb-producing foods were effectively banned from space missions. Tortillas replaced bread, as they produce almost no crumbs and remain stable in zero gravity. Sometimes the safety of an entire system depends not on complex engineering, but on the absence of the smallest details, even something as simple as a breadcrumb.